Farooqui show, where we will spend the next few days speaking to Journalists India for our Press Freedom Under Fire Women in Media Speak Out series, which is supported by International Association of Women in Radio and Television, the Journalism and Media International Center at Oslo Metropolitan University. I am absolutely thrilled to have an amazing set of journalists and filmmakers joining us today for our conversation. We are going to spend the next 60 minutes discussing challenges to journalism, security, impunity, and censorship. Before we begin, here is a quick introduction. Today with us, Pamela Philippos, who is presently the ombudsperson of the New Delhi-based news portal, TheWire.in. She has also served as the editor-in-chief of Women's Speaker Service and the senior assistant editor of the Indian Express. Her book, Media's Shifting Terrain, 5 Years That Transformed the Way India Communicates, was published in 2009, and along with that, she is a recipient of several awards, including the Make Baby Award for Outstanding Journalism. Pamela, it is wonderful to have you here today. We also have Rifat Mohideen. She is an independent journalist. She covers human rights, education, and the environment. Her work has appeared in reputed national and international media organizations, including Al Jazeera, RIA, and the Fox. Thank you, Rifat, so much for joining us today. We also have Leena Manimekala. She is an award poet and has received the Charles Lewis Art Award, the Fellowship and Commonwealth Fellowship for her work in cinema and gender. Her work, The Dead Sea on Sri Lankan Tamil Refugees and Indian Fishermen, won her NAWF Award at Tokyo for the women's cinema and was recognized with Indian Panorama selections after legally winning the initial ban by the Indian Censor Board. Thank you, Leena, for joining us. And last but not the least, we have Geeta Seshi. She is an independent journalist and has worked in the field of freedom of expression, media ethics, media ownership, and working conditions of journalists. She is a member of the UNESCO's Media Freedom Committee India, also the founding editor of Free Speech Collective, set up in 2018, engaged in protecting the right to freedom of expression and vigorously promotes free speech and the right to. Thank you to each and everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and it is wonderful to have you on the Sania Foundation. So I would now request all our panelists to quickly share their opening thoughts on challenges to journalism, security, impunity, and censorship. Perhaps not spend more than 4 to 5 minutes, as we will come back and do a quick round of Q&A as well. But Pamela, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you, Sania, first for having me on your vibrant show with lots of very important journalists. I'm so happy to have them as my co-panelists. Today's discussion has 3 words on center stage: security, impunity, and censorship. Let me start with security. The security of the journalist is foundational to any meaningful journalism. It is a significant benchmark. A constitutive media freedom is by its very nature a media environment where journalists are free from the fear that their work could jeopardize their lives and livelihoods and their well-being, the well-being of their families as well. India has never been a particularly congenial place for journalistic pursuits, but precarity since the Narendra Modi government came to power in 2014 has become marked. A supposed participative democracy is now deemed as an electoral autocracy. So that's the difference. And India has steadily dropped several notches in the World Freedom Index and presently ranks at 142 among 180 countries. So we are in the bottom half of the table. Draconian laws without the possibility of bail have never been used as widely and recklessly as it has by this government. And journalists in Kashmir, of course, have suffered the worst consequences of this trend. But elsewhere too, such recourse is not uncommon. The COVID-19 pandemic was seized as an opportunity to arrest, detain, and intimidate reporters and editors and journalists. And Kerala-based Siddiqui Kappan has been in an Uttar Pradesh jail for, can you believe it, a story he has never written. So that's the extent of the impunity with which our authorities have conducted themselves. So let us examine this word impunity. The world is seeing the rise of authoritarian populist regimes, many of them fueled by digital tools that further disinformation and propaganda. The use of digital tools to come to power through money fueled elections and the support of corporate big media has been one of the features of this phenomenon. And once in power, people who come to power continue to use these digital tools to entrap and enrapture. Let's not forget, they enrapture large numbers and repress and shut down oppositional voices and conduct themselves with absolute impunity. We see this pattern in country after country, whether in Hungary or Brazil, Poland, or the Philippines, and perhaps later we'll talk a little more about the situation in India. So, destabilizing and disrupting the media provides a perfect condition for our third word, which is censorship. There are many shades of censorship depending on who imposes it, as well as the intent and manner in which it is imposed. The intent of state censorship in China, for instance, is to bring media outlets within the sphere of the state and subordinate to the powers that rule the country. The aim is to check dissent and curtail collective action by silencing comments that question the doings of those in power. So we have many countries trying to emulate China. And that's the sad story of today's world. Let us briefly look at what is perhaps the most intangible but insidious form of censorship, and that is self censorship, or what may be described as a selection and deselection of processes while reporting and editing. Both formal forms of state censorship and inherent fears arising from the lack of security of the journalist gives rise to self-censorship. Self-censorship, because it's not dependent on a formal order or law, is difficult to weigh in on. But we know that as journalists, all of us at some time or other have taken recourse to it. I will stop here. My panelists have great experience in this field, and I hope the conversation will be rich as it promises to be. Thank you, Sania, again.
Thank you, Pamela. That was amazing. Rifat, why don't you speak next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having so like strong voices of women journalists here in the panel. I think what Pamela already said, all these things apply to every one of us. I don't think like there is any difference between Kashmir or any other place right now, because what was experimented in Kashmir is now being used everywhere else. So I guess like being a journalist, I don't know, like I would hardly find any person like in my place, among my colleagues, among my friends, among like all most of the people I know. I think it's a very hard choice to choose journalism as a career right now, because how you the career is seen right now, it is like it has become something like either you are with us or against us. So journalist is now a division, it's like a group now. Like either you are on that side or this side. So that is the kind of narrative that is going on right now. So now if I come back to Kashmir, where like obviously like lot of things are happening like in last 2 years. Obviously there have always been like the kind of censorship, restrictions, internet shutdowns, like extraordinary things have happened with journalists. But despite all that, stories have been coming out, people have been working in difficult circumstances in the armed violence. Like I like, because I have worked now for so many years, I can completely like relate and what I have witnessed in my life here. So it's very difficult. Like first of all, you have a conflict, so that becomes a big hindrance in your work, in your reportage. So in conflict you are supposed to be very careful how you report, what how you can be objective. Then the other thing comes how much you censor your own self. You don't want to kind of hurt any party, because then you are at stake, your family is at stake, everything you have is at stake. But what has happened in the past 2 years, I think all the priorities of the journalists have changed. For example, if we see, first of all, we did not have internet like for so many months. Like without internet, can I, like, it should not be even a discussion that I am talking about it. Like internet is something like, people won't imagine that we don't have internet, reporter won't imagine that I don't have an internet and I am supposed to talk it as a difficulty, present it somewhere as a difficulty. So first of all, people fought like how to fight the stories, not for their own life but for the internet, for the basic thing, for the basic human right. They fought for months together and they navigated this place, that place, just to report. They showed the extraordinary courage. They did not like give up in those restrictions. Then the other thing comes like, okay, if your report is like, if your report is very critical of the government, if your report is, what you are saying, you are telling the truth, you are projecting the real picture, so then there is another worry, because obviously there have been arbitrary summons. People have been booked, like journalists have been booked under like anti-terror laws. And then it does not only put you in difficulty, it puts your whole family. And what it does is that it triggers fear among all the other journalists. So what they have started is self-censoring every word they write. You won't find a journalist in Kashmir, I don't think anyone would even claim that I don't self-censor, I'm the one who says everything. So that is not the case. I'm sure everyone self-censors. So then there are these, a new media policy. So it is like all that's happening at an institutional level. So now you have a new media policy here, which tells you like they will decide what is a report, like what report is like truth, what is not true. Then there comes like the local media. If you see in last 2 years, it has been completely crushed in Kashmir. You won't find a critical report in the paper, like that the papers who used to document everything, you won't find those reporters. Then there comes another thing like advertisements have been stopped. So I won't be able to explain like all the things, all the pressures that all the the things, pressure that has been created on the journalists overall. So it's like I'm sure like it's very difficult to sustain in those circumstances, like arbitrary summons, questions, and all the other things. So there then people lost jobs, because when the local newspapers kind of lost their advertisements, because in Kashmir most of the papers are dependent on government money for advertisements. They won't be able to survive like for a month or more without the government money. So obviously when the government stops advertisements, people lose jobs. So in the a middle aged man or a middle aged journalist, where will they go, like what career they can choose in the middle of like their life. So then comes the mental trauma, not with the mental trauma, not only with the losing job, but all the fear it brings. So there have been raids on journalists, their houses, their families are being harassed. So all the kind of atmosphere that has been created, it's very very difficult to sustain. And I'm sure like it's happening elsewhere in the country also, like people are being booked under UAPA or other laws, like for reporting or for the potential like they had to report. I think that's it.
Thank you. We'll discuss this more in detail once I come back to you. Geeta, why don't you go next?
Hi, thanks, Sania. Thank you so much for having this discussion and for having me on the show with Pam and Rifat and Lena. Uh, I think is there's absolutely no doubt amongst all of us that news gathering from the ground has become a very dangerous exercise. Journalists are killed, they're attacked, they face criminal charges, interrogations, summons, as Rifat has been telling us about what is happening in Kashmir, summons from law enforcing agencies. And like Pam said, the case of Siddiq Kapan, who didn't even, who was only proceeding to a scene of crime and was arrested and has spent more than a year and a month in jail. So, yes, we are seeing a very alarming shrinkage in the space for independent news and views. There is a lot of fear. And in our reports for the Free Speech Collective and earlier with my work in the booth, we tried very hard to document self censorship because of the intimidation and harassment that journalists have been facing. Uh, and this has been happening over several years now, more than a decade of the kind of reports and instances that we have documented. So it has been very difficult to document self censorship. But we do have very significant instances in the past few years, in the past 2 or 3 years especially, of journalists who walked out or whose services were terminated by media houses because they did not toe the line or because they were restricted on social media or on Twitter or anything, or even, we've had instances of a journalist who has now challenged a termination because of what she put out on Twitter. So there is this kind of resistance, and I do want to say that the shrinkage of democratic space because of all of this is not merely because of the kind of laws or the sort of repression that the government or law enforcing agencies are unleashing on journalists, but also the complicity and the capitulation of media houses. And I think Pam brought that point out very well. The other point I want to say is that uh, we really need to understand why this is happening and why it's become so dangerous to work as journalists in India today. And I would like to look at two instances, two very telling instances of what has really brought us to this point where we are saying that we are falling in almost all global freedom indices. We are in such a pathetic position in terms of the ranking. And the reason really is because I would like to, like I said, give you two instances. One is what happened on March 24th, 2020, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi summoned around 20 owners of media houses to seek their cooperation in putting out the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. And he asked for positive stories. And as you all know, 6 hours later, there was a lockdown announced. And he announced a lockdown which was crippling for scores of migrant workers. And we all know what happened in the last year. The second instance is was what happened in on August 4th, 2019 in Kashmir, when there was this unprecedented communication shutdown. And I think both instances are illustrative of the government's effort to leave no stone unturned to shape a narrative of false positivity. So, in many ways, any sort of deviation from this is being penalized and criminalized. Any deviation or any kind of independent investigation or any sort of dissenting voices that journalists are voicing or that is coming out in independent media is extremely dangerous for us today.
Thank you, Geeta. Lina, why don't you go next?
Thank you, Sania, for inviting me, and I'm so happy to be with
Sorry, Lina, could you increase your volume, audio, bit,
uh,
or come a little
yeah,
closer? Yeah,
maybe I should come close.
yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Thank you,
much better.
Sania.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sania, for inviting me. And it's great to meet Pramila, Geeta, and Rifat. Um, while we are talking in the panel, our comrade Puram Parvez was arrested in Kashmir yesterday. Uh, I had been to Kashmir to film the victims of Kunan Pushkara case in 2015, and I met Khurram Parvez at that time. And now, he's detained again now. Like before, also he was detained and he was in jail for few weeks, and now he's already detained. This is the situation, and when we are talking, we have to also remember our comrades in jail because of Bhima Koregan case, and because of the dissent and protest happened during, happened at the JNU. So this is the, and few weeks ago, two women journalists were detained because they just went to report. They just went for their professional work to Tripura. Uh, Actually, while I was tweeting about Siddiq Kapan, who went to Hadras and who was arrested not even before filing a story, I received my passport impoundment order. You should believe that I actually outed my sexual predator during the peak of Me Too movement. And just because of that one tweet, just because I spoke my truth, just because I expressed my experience on sexual harassment during the peak of Me Too movement, I was filed a defamation case and now my passport is impounded. Cases in three courts. And the main, defamation petition calls me an urban Naxal, calls me an anti-Modi, calls me an obscene poet, calls out all my political opinions, and prejudices the court that my character is of question. So it's actually, I mean, last week, uh, I had filed a high court writ against the passport impoundment, and the judge observed that the passport should be released immediately. But the judge himself said this is a criminal misuse. This is the misuse of judiciary. This is weaponizing of laws, and you're harassing this woman. I mean, in the open trial, uh, judge was telling passport officer that you're harassing her, and this is against Article 14. I'm pursuing my studies. I'm in the second year of Master of Fine Arts in Film at York University. I'm detained. Actually, passport impoundment is another form of house arrest. Like, you're not allowed to travel. You're not allowed to even travel outside Chennai, because almost every week I'm having three hearings, because I'm fighting the main defamation at the magistrate court. I'm fighting for the transfer of court at the district court because there is no fair trial happening in the magistrate court. And I'm fighting passport impoundment at the high court. So I'm not able to travel anywhere. I'm a filmmaker and I'm a master's student. I'm not able to study. I'm not able to screen my films in US because my US screening tour was scheduled in the entire fall semester across 15 universities. Most of it got cancelled and most of it got converted to virtual screenings. But I'm denied of my livelihood, my basic right to travel, just because I tweeted my sexual harassment experience during the Me Too movement. So, is free speech, does it not apply to women who speak about sexual harassment? That's a question. That's a though it really sounds very ridiculous, but this is the bizarre situation we are in.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you for sharing that with us. We'll discuss that in detail once we come back to you with more questions. So obviously, what we've heard and what we've seen from all our panelists is that the state of press, the state of journalism, media, even women for that matter, is under a lot of trial, under a lot of scrutiny, and is it fair? Is it justified? Is what we want to find out in the next couple of minutes. The freedom of press and working atmosphere of journalists in any country is revealed by the World Press Freedom Index, as we know, which is published every year by Reporters Without Border. And as everyone in the panel also mentioned, India currently ranks 142 out of 180 countries. And this leaves journalists, those who are doing real journalism, under constant threats and attacks. So now I want to open up and start with my question. Pamela, I'll start with you. How dangerous is this gradual shrinking of what used to be a strong democratic footprint across the? Why is India continuously sliding down in the World Press Freedom Index?
Sania, before I answer your question, I think a disclaimer is also due. Um, the thing is that this is not the first time that India has faced censorship. Let us not forget the 22 months of emergency in the mid 70s. And there we had the physical, a guy would turn up at the newsroom, sit there and go through each copy that was produced. So, I mean, we have a wonderful legacy, by the way. And let's not forget that. But it is on that foundation that we are seeing the developments under the Modi government. Today, things are far more sophisticated, of course, largely due to digital media and their powers of replication, repression, and surveillance. We have in Prime Minister Modi a person who has personally suffered from what we may term as independent media coverage, when the national press gave him a really hard time during the Gujarat riots of 2012, and who was one of the earliest among Indian politicians to understand the unique power of digital media in its ability to reach out to people in a unquestioned way, because there is no give and take here. It's a one-way street largely. Much has been written about his electoral campaign of 2014 and the use it made of digital media, including the use of selfies. Very, very, very astonishing and entrepreneurial type of use of selfies was seen at that period. What we saw consequent to his arrival in New Delhi as prime minister was the ramping up of the cult building of himself as Hindu Samrat, king of Hindu hearts, that had already been evident during those election campaigns. As a senior member of the Rashtriya Sevak Sangh, an organization that has had an unbroken existence in this country since 1925 and which is based on Hindutva, or the ideology of Hindu exceptionalism, Modi did what he is required to do: promote Hindutva as a campaign. I would attribute the growing hegemony of the forces of authoritarian Hindutva as a most important reason for the shrinking of the democratic space. Given its drive to create India as a Hindu majority state, given its desire to pit community against community, given its strong will to suborn India's largest minority, the Muslims, under its foot almost. The dangers of this is obvious. Hindutva politicians under Modi rule are working to a plan of making India a majoritarian state. And the use and abuse of media power that we see is one of the means they're using to achieve this. I'll stop here. I mean, I know there's so much to say on this, but I'll stop here.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Pamela. My next question is on impunity. The Global Impunity Index 2021, which lists a dozen countries that fare the worst when it comes to prosecuting killers of journalists. India is ranked 12th on that list, where the top 4 are occupied by Somalia, Syria, Iraq, and South Sudan, where conflict, political instability, and weak judicial mechanism perpetuate a cycle of violence against journalists. How alarming is it to have one of the world's largest and the biggest democracy on this list? Why is India failing to protect its journalists?
This is this is a wonderful question, Sania, and it's interesting, really, truly, to see India ranked 12th in this list that includes Somalia and South Sudan and all those countries that we love to put up there and knock down. This indicates how greatly have the various institutions that have protected Indian democracy thus far been captured by the ruling elite. India was among the first to have a right to information law. Today, its right to information commission has been reduced to a shell. it was one of the first to have a National Human Rights Commission. And we know now what the National Human Rights Commission discusses, debates on, whether we have had too much human rights in this country. That's the question that is worrying the National Human Rights Commission. So can you imagine how far our institutions gone down? They've slid down right to the very bottom. So, I mean, it is institutions that should have protected us, but have they? The answer is no. The judiciary has been forced to conform to governmental imperatives, largely because the people who headed it were compromised in one way or the other. And the government, with its powers of surveillance, has been able to control them. I mean, look at the way many of them went on after their tenures as judges, as the country's most senior judges. They have gone on to grace various institutions and even enter the Rajya Sabha. So it shows how compromised our judges have become over a period of time. And interestingly, even in the emergency, we saw this, the suborning of the judiciary. The Pegasus scandal that has rocked the country a couple of months ago and continues to rock it, thank God, indicates how some of India's most important institutions have been brought to its knees through the use of spyware. The election commission, one of the election commissioners himself was being surveilled. Can you imagine? The one man who stood up among the three, in this election commission, who questioned certain stances of the commission vis-a-vis the prime minister, got surveilled. He got, so that is the condition in which we are functioning. So when journalists get surveilled, when journalists get thrown into jail, there are very few people who are courageous enough to speak out for them, especially since big media is already there only to promote the voices of the Modi government. And why is this so? Here again, we have to open the black box and the connections between the owners of media and their editors and managements. I mean, it's a black box, but it's quite clear the kind of, when an Ambani, controls 1/4 of Indian media, what can we expect from the Indian media? So these are questions again, and I'll leave it here. And later, if there's a chance, we can discuss it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Geeta, coming to you. We are seeing a lot of attacks on, as Pamela discussed, we're seeing a lot of attacks on right to privacy of citizens, freedom of press, including rights of journalists to ensure protection of sources with all the digital software, including Pegasus and other tools used to monitor journalists. Why has it become so difficult or dangerous to work as a journalist today? And how do we get around doing our job safely?
Sania, I think I'd like to speak a little bit about the impunity that Pamela also spoke of, and very correctly spoke of the way in which institutions are being suborned. We've been, looking at instances of the attacks on journalists in India and the impunity that governs a lot of this. There were about a study that I had done with the Thakur Foundation called Getting Away with Murder. We documented about 40 instances of killings of journalists between 2014 to 19, out of which 21 were linked directly to journalism, and the remaining we were not very clear because the evidence on the ground did not seem to show that. We have only 3 convictions so far. Now, in almost all these instances, and we've talked to journalists who were also attacked. So, while killings are, of course, the ultimate form of censorship, number of the journalists who were attacked, there were about 198 in that period. And we went through each and every case And we spoke to these journalists, and one thing that really came out was that these journalists were working on stories. They were working on reports of corruption, of mafias, of sand mining, and a whole range of stories. They were freelancers. They were mostly working in regional media, except for, of course, the celebrated, the much better known instances, the ghastly, killing of Gauri Lankesh or Shujat Bukhari. Many of these journalists are from small town media, and they use a lot of Facebook. They use a lot of social media. In fact, many of them said that they had given complaints to the police. They did speak of the kind of threats that they were getting. They did even tell us, they did give evidence of the sort of complaints that they submitted, but in many cases it was too late. So I think the question of impunity is really, as Pam said, there is the suborning of institutions, but there is also a complete breakdown of any kind of justice delivery. Now, in this situation, given this kind of situation that journalists are working on, we're also seeing this sort of what you said, the right to privacy, freedom of the press, the rights of journalists, surveillance, the snooping that we saw with Pegasus, all of this. So yes, it has become extremely dangerous for journalists to be able to function and to work. Uh, but uh, but I do think that the journalists are resisting. They are pushing back. They are writing. They are bringing out. There is a lot of fact checking. There is good, solid, fact-based journalism. Um, None of this really is what you see in very good mainstream publications. Unfortunately, when there is very good investigative journalism happening in mainstream publications, for instance, the Panama Papers or the second round of it, it's virtually ignored by the government. And there is absolutely no attempt to even address it. So, this kind of indifference to really good storytelling is dangerous. But I do think that journalists are pushing back, and there is still a lot of journalism that is happening. So we need to figure out how to strengthen the kind of journalism that is taking place, the kind of investigative reports that are still coming out.
Yeah. And a lot of this is done by independent media. But what we also see is
By
also different types of repressive laws on sedition, state secret, national
uh,
security.
See, about the repressive laws, yes, there is, of course, sedition, which we have been campaigning to have repealed for the longest time now. There is also the UAPA, which we have Siddiq Kapan, of course, who has been charged under the UAPA, Asif Sultan, even earlier. And now, of course, we have journalists who are summoned by the NIA for their stories. So this is really, and the recent instance of the journalists who were tweeting on Tripura and who have been now charged under the UAPA. So UAPA is being used, and it's a far more difficult law, almost impossible to get bail under the UAPA. So inherently, inbuilt in the law. So it is definitely far more draconian and repressive than what we have seen, even in the earlier laws that are meant to be, the kind of laws that were supposed to um, crack down on terrorism or terror-related crimes. So this is really something that journalists need to speak out about. And this is not just journalists, like Lena pointed out, it's citizens, civil society activists, there's the lawyers, just about everybody who speaks out are being targeted under these laws. Uh, the kind of snooping that we are seeing, surveillance, is really another very, very alarming factor. The raids on media houses, which are independent, is also something that we are now seeing far more than we ever did before, especially with, at least in recent times. I mean, Pam is absolutely right, of course, about the entire period of the emergency, But
Yeah,
in recent times, this is absolutely unprecedented.
yeah. Thank you, Geeta. Rifat, I'm going to come to you now. You report from one of the toughest regions in the country, and you've been attacked for doing your job. Tell us what it is to be a reporter covering Jammu and Kashmir in 2021.
Uh, I think if we compare like last 2 years and the times before that, it has become like much more worst. And being like, obviously it's difficult for obviously everyone, men, women, and all, like all the journalists who are covering the region right now. There is a pressure from all the sides, like. As I already mentioned, the local media is under a lot of pressure. The local media that accommodated hundreds of local journalists, provided them jobs and all, is under a lot of pressure, because the first thing is that they are losing their revenue. They are not able to do the critical reporting, and people are like criticizing them, like why they are not covering the events how they used to cover in the past. And the other thing is that summoning of journalists, arbitrary summoning and questioning them for their work, for their political ideology, for like everything. The journalists have become like the easiest targets right now, because obviously when you don't want something to come out, the story to come out, the soft target in the first instance is a journalist, because he is like kind of, he has to kind of go, he has to attend the questioning. When he gets summoned, he has to go. But also there is also a lack of support, like not lot of people speak about when there is a case of harassment of Kashmiri journalists. Like there is like how everyone should kind of support them, they are not getting that kind of support. And also there are not there are not presence of vibrant institutions who could kind of stand up, who could kind of provide them the kind of legal help or other assistance they get. And now you can also see the national media, which has already kind of silenced the critical reporting from Kashmir, like how they used to do in the past and what they do now. The national reporters are also not reporting the events like how in the past it would happen. But there is only also the one thing, the most of the journalism that happens is happening because of the independent journalists, because there are the good news is that yeah, there are like lot of independent platforms that are giving space to the critical reporting, that are giving platform to the young reporters who are like despite, I think despite all the pressure, all the intimidation, all the harassment, all the threats, the stories are still coming out by due to the efforts of like journalists who are putting like, who are taking lot of risks, who are still reporting. Because in Kashmir it becomes difficult, like oh, you can see the past like 2 months they have been like they have been really disturbing things have happened in Kashmir. So obviously it becomes paramount at the same time to report in a region which is like marred by conflict, by violence. In the recent months there has been like, there have been over 50 killings from October. Yeah, it is very difficult, it is like lot of pressure for a journalist to report. But yeah, everyone is trying in their own way to report whatever is happening. And also as a female reporter I can say that not lot of women right now, I don't see like a lot of women would choose this career. Like you can see there are like, despite like I studied in a college where we were only like women have just getting the journalism degree. But at the end of the day, when we finished our degree, not many women chose to kind of join the field, because obviously it comes with lot of risk, it comes with lot of challenge. It's not only the challenge like how you see it is due to the violence, but also the challenge at the family level. When they hear like someone has been arrested, there is a raid at somebody's home, and like how all the things are unfolding on the journalist, so they will obviously like they won't let you to join this career, because it carries not only it does not put a journalist in risk, but it also puts the whole family. So you can understand the trauma. And I like I'm so sure about it, like I guess most of the journalists in Kashmir are going through some kind of psychological pressure, through kind of mental trauma, depression and anxiety. These cases have like, because when it happens with someone, you know, when they are being threatened, intimidated, and all the things are happening. So you kind of imagine yourself in that situation, because everyone says, okay, this happened with this person, tomorrow it can happen with me, tomorrow it can happen with my family. So like working, functioning in that kind of fear, in that kind of, mental stress, it's very difficult to operate.
Yeah. And how much did August 5th, 2019 change the state of how media works, rather is allowed to work, report, and cover the state, which includes, as you mentioned, the curfews and internet ban, media passes, access to that, police raids, threats, and even arrests and detention? Has there been an increase in harassment of journalists in Jammu and Kashmir?
I think, yeah, if you talk about the past 2 years since 2019, there has been a lot of like, there have been restrictions, there has been clamped down. Like for like so many days after August 5, we didn't have an internet. Then the government started a media center where like you had like 4 or 5 computers. Initially there were just two, then there were increased to 4 or 5 computers, and you had hundreds of journalists, not only the Kashmiri journalists but all the journalists who came from outside to report. So we would get 5-10 minutes, to check your mail, and there were no privacy also, because they were their computers, you had to access all the things from there. And and also there was no transport, traveling to stories, getting to talk to your sources, getting to the spots. Like it was extremely difficult for months together in that scenario. And also, yeah, when there are restrictions, I don't think that the rights of the journalists are being respected. Like how a journalist would kind of have like they would get the passes and all. I think the passes and all are given on the basis how your reporting has been. You are being treated how you, so that's how they see you as a journalist and as an individual. And also after this 2019 there came a new media policy. And Masrat Zahra, female journalist, she was booked under UAPA. Then there were another case in which Gauhar Gilani, another journalist, was like kind of booked under UAPA. Then there were cases where the journalists were questioned, summoned, their phones were confiscated, they were checked. So you don't enjoy the kind of privacy you think you might enjoy as a journalist. In Kashmir there's nothing like that. Like in recent months there have been raids on 4 journalists, and like they were questioned for so many days together. Then you might have read about Kashmir Times, the Kashmir Times office, they were told to vacate the office. And the local media, like slowly the journalism is being dismantled. Every month, every week you have a case where like you hear. Yesterday there was this report that now the government has asked the widely read local newspaper Greater Kashmir to vacate its offices, like the government quarters that they use their office for 3 decades. So these kinds of in this kinds of scenario, you obviously feel, yeah, the situation how media operated before August 2019 and how it operates now is completely a different picture.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rifat, for that. Lena, I'm going to come to you because we are going to be running out of time very soon. So, I don't want to miss the chance to speak. You come from a very different industry, but as we discussed, whether it comes to censorship, whether it comes to freedom of speech, freedom of expression, I think all of us are in the same boat everywhere. You faced, could you tell us a little about the challenges you faced as a filmmaker? Your work has come under scrutiny and censorship by CBFC. Do you think that artistic expression and creative freedom are being unduly curbed, especially if the work is critical of social issues or political establishment in the present times, and especially in independent media, independent filmmakers? What's it like?
Yeah, Pamela was talking about failure of institutions. Recently, the current regime dissolved FCAT. FCAT is Film Certification Appellate Tribunal. Without the tribunal, none of my films would have got released. My earlier film, Sengadal, which is about the Sri Lankan Tamil refugees and the fishermen, the Indian fishermen, it was banned by CBFC. CBFC is the certification board. It is supposed to act as a certification board, but it always acts as a censor board. In 2011, they banned my film, and I had to do a protracted legal struggle with FCAT, with the Appellate Tribunal, to get my film out. Luckily, we have Article 19, and I got my film relieved, certified, cleared without any cut. The same history repeated for my new film also. It is Madati, a fiction feature. It is about it's a coming of age story of adolescent girl from an unseeable slave community. CBFC again refused certification for the film. I had to appeal, and it took 7 months for me to get the film cleared from the FCAT. Again, legally, it was cleared without a single cut, not even one sound cut. So we do have laws. We do have a constitution protecting us, but we see utter failure of institutions. And FCAT is just get dissolved, like no noise about it. And Geeta was talking about impunity. The industry you were talking about, I'm not part of the industry. I really don't want to be part of industry. I'm an independent. I want to remain independent, because this whole industry for me looks like a huge palace. It's like a boys' club, you know. So I mean, I'm nowhere. To be very honest, I'm a nobody. But still, I exist as a lone voice, because this is how I can exist. FCAT is abolished and nobody spoke about it. There is absolute silence. At least after that, there was an amendment in the Cinematograph Act, 1952 Cinematograph Act, that is again a colonial, very colonial in its nature. And independent filmmakers have been fighting it, like, you know, fighting to revise it, to make it contemporary, to make it, you know, lawful, to make it like, you know, something democratic. But this current regime actually, you know, suggested to amend the bill, which almost says, please stop making films. I mean, I can talk for the whole session about what is wrong with the amendment bill. I mean, there was some noise, and we actually, like, you know, issued a statement, we collected signatures, but we are going nowhere. I mean, I was talking about going to Kashmir in 2015. I was in Manipur. I was in Gujarat. I was in Rajasthan. I was going to all conflict places to film the survivors of sexual abuse. But now I don't know if I can go. If I have something to shoot in UP, I don't know. I had been in Sri Lanka. I am the first filmmaker to travel to all parts of Sri Lanka to document the enforced disappearances. I was arrested. I was sent back to India. Then again, I went to Sri Lanka. I was detained few times by Sri Lankan army, but still I did it, and that was broadcast in Channel 4. I don't know. Now Rajapaksa is in rule, but I can even imagine going to Sri Lanka. But I don't know if I can go to UP now. If I can go to Kashmir now. If I can go to Tripura now. What is happening to a journalist? What is happening to our human rights activists? I mean, with all these draconian laws, it actually appeals to filmmakers as well. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, the filmmakers in industry don't care because they are busy making money. They're busy making stuff to, you know, do box office hits to earn more money. They even, commodify, you know, Dalit politics and human rights and everything to make box office hits. I'm talking about independent filmmakers. I'm talking about, like, you know, poets. I mean, my second poetry collection was actually framed as, you know, obscene content. And Hindu people, my Hindu Makkal Katchi, that's the name of the party, Hindu People Party, they filed a police case against me, charging me like I'm writing obscene poems. And ultra left group also witch hunted me, saying like my poems are blasphemic. So right, left, center, everybody, like, you know, there is no difference between these ideological groups when it comes to women talking about sexuality,
Yeah.
when it comes to women who is having a political opinion. So making films, writing poetry, free expression, freedom of speech, and talking about sexual harassment. Hello, that is my fundamental right to be safe and to be free to do what I want to do and to protect myself. That's a fundamental thing. It is like eating, it is like, breathing. You're not allowed to speak about it. Your passport can be impounded. Even after the Me Too cases, even after the court judgments, this predator has harmed women in the industry. They have written to me, but they're not willing to come in open because they're afraid their passports will be impounded. They're afraid they will be slut shamed. They're afraid they will be like their character will be assassinated. They're afraid their political opinions, their free thoughts will be, used against their existence. They're afraid. I mean, Me Too movement, I mean, I would say people despise it. This country despise it, and they intentionally made the movement to die. And I'm very sorry to say, yes, definitely Women in Cinema Collective express solidarity, Network of Women in Media express solidarity, but there is acute failure of feminist movement in India because I'm fighting all alone. I mean, I voiced, during the Me Too movement, thinking I'm part of a collective movement. I'm actually consequences of, long feminist movements. I'm not someone who is like, jump from the sky. I'm born out of sacrifices of women. But this Me Too movement is made to fail, made to die. And one of the reason is also because of acute failure of, you know, uh, feminist movement. I'm sorry to say that, but I have to tell that. I have to
That's your
register that.
opinion. Um,
And also media houses, like they actually act as moralist gatekeepers. I mean, everybody has blood in hands in terms of sexual harassment. Actually, I would say this, we were talking about impunity. I mean, there is radio silence. It's deafening in the progressive spaces, in the left liberal spaces, in the most, neoliberal spaces. There is silence about women's demand sexual harassment because I would say everybody has blood in their hands.
do you think India will be ready to continue this fight against women? Do you think because we are seeing so many women like you who are fighting, who are standing up, who are challenging, who are taking this up in the High Court, do you think this is going to change or bring any change in the future? Because what we've seen post Me Too, yes, there are a lot of women who are still not willing to come forward and speak because of the intimidation. But there are women like you who are speaking up. Do you think this is going to impact this? And especially because this also impacts the work that you do.
See, in Tamil Nadu, a few weeks ago, a few months ago, I mean, there is a huge, breakout of students calling out teachers in the schools. And there are hundreds of mails in my inbox. Young women are writing to me, young artists are writing to me, my alumni, my school alumni, my college alumni are writing to me. Now, even in the last week, I mean, there was one death in Coimbatore. A school girl killed herself. Actually, women dying of sexual harassment, they don't kill themselves. It is this society who kill them. It is murder. It is institutional murder. When a woman writes a letter and says like, I'm harassed, so I'm taking my life, it is not suicide. It is institutional murder. But there is a huge, discourse in the society because the girl is dead, because everybody somehow wants the woman who is sexually harassed to be dead. They don't want them to be alive. If they are alive and talking, then nobody wants to, like, hear them. They all want to silence them. They all want to neglect them, and they all want to shame them. But if somebody is dead, or if somebody is like harassed, like how our, Nirbhaya was harassed, then like everybody wants to talk about it. This is a sorry state of affairs. Yes, there is change because now, like 10 years ago, when I was in 20s, I mean, talking about sexual harassment, talking about, like, they call it as eve teasing. I don't know from where that word comes from. It is denial of dignity of woman. Nobody even discussed within the industry, especially within the film industry, like regional industries like Tamil industries. Nobody talks about it. It is so normalized. But now it has become a drawing room discussion. It has been discussed in the tea shops. And when people hire women, there is a discussion. I don't know how effective I mean, how where we are going, and it is so difficult to assess it. But definitely there is some change. I am seeing it, but I don't know how far we should go. But it has become a subject of discussion. And now
That's a good start.
school students are coming. I mean, now Tamil Nadu government was supposed to announce a number, and day before, 2 days before, they are getting calls, repeatedly, from school girls reporting about their teachers. And this is something, a silent bomb, which is like waiting to just blow the nation off. I'm telling you, this is really a silent bomb. And I think whatever is happening is just like, giving us this extension of time for the bomb to blast.
Yeah, hopefully not. But thank you, Lena. What we've had is an amazing conversation with everyone. Thank you for all your thoughts. Very important. What we are seeing is that whether you're a filmmaker, whether you're a woman who's a filmmaker, whether you're a journalist covering, whether you have to fight the family, whether you have to fight the government, none of it is easy. And I must say, I'm very lucky to have a bunch of really kick-ass women joining us today for the conversation, because just listening to you all, it made me also realize how difficult it is to just step out to do our work. I have also been under attacks myself, so it's a common story everywhere. Since you're out of time, your closing thoughts on this? We quickly take everyone's remarks just for about 2 to 3 minutes each. Pamela, why don't you?
No, I think there are two things that jumped out of the page for me. One, of course, is Geeta's question that can we make the hands of those who are already working and coming out of this and trying to fight back, can we make their hands stronger? Whether it's in the film media or whether it's in journalism, we need to actually amplify those voices. And here, this is where the silence, the radio silence, as Lena puts it, of civil society is also quite startling. Because in a sense, we should have the Nirbhaya type struggles over so many things that are happening and which have gone wrong. And I will stop here, but I think you have really touched a chord. And I hope this discussion doesn't stop with these episodic, TV TV debates. And I think it's very important. Thank you, Lena, for really actually showing us the truth in so many ways and speaking from your heart as well as your bye.
Thank you, Pamela. Geeta, why don't you?
I think it's important for us to look at the structural ways in which the government is trying to sort of, imprison the media. So there are, like Lena mentioned, the law on the FCAT and the way in which they're removing the tribunal. And we have this similar experience in print, in news, where digital news is under a lot of threat because of the guidelines and the code of conduct. In fact, it will affect all kinds of news on digital platforms, including perhaps something like this show. So we need to look at these structural kind of these laws and these mechanisms that by which we are being weakened. But I also feel that it's very, very important to increase a kind of collaborative storytelling. We need to have organize at the workplace, wherever possible, we need to strengthen those networks. And I think, to add to what Lena and Rifat have been telling us about how things are for journalists who face, or even for filmmakers, or for even citizens who face this kind of flack and this sort of backlash, how we strengthen them so that it doesn't become a lone struggle. They're not all alone in the way in which they are struggling. So that really, we really need to increase those kind of networks of solidarity. But ultimately, I really feel that, where journalists are concerned, or where media freedom is concerned, uh, we are people, documentary filmmakers, journalists, writers, are reporting, they're writing in the public interest, and they need to get the support of the public for their work. So we really have to figure out how we can do that, because
More
this is being
engagement.
done for public interest.
Yeah. Thank you. Rifat, why don't you go next?
Uh, I think what they already put very important points here. What I would say in my concluding points is that journalists were supposed to tell the story, but they have now themselves become the story. So I think we as journalists, as a network, as an institution, as a family, as a kind of solidarity and support, we need to amplify their story as well, so that the institution of journalism and the stories that journalists had become voice of, they need to continue.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rifat. Lena, coming back to you.
I'm officially single, but I think I'm in complicated relationship with censorship because be it
That's the best line I've heard.
be it filmmaking or be it like Me Too movement, like I'm always under the censorship radar. See, I just wanted to say one thing. At least with the constitutional censorship, we have courts. Like it is so bizarre to even imagine lining up outside the courts for getting your films cleared because there is no SCAT now. But still, we have some laws which we can use to protect our freedom of expression. But unconstitutional censorship, I mean, mobocracy, it has become the order of this nation. You make a film, when you want to bring out the film, you don't know from where these people are coming from. I mean, now there is social media and like they want to rape you, they want to put acid on you, they will call you a slut, they will call you a whore every day. Like now it doesn't even like I mean, I'm just like it is not even pinching me like an ant because that kind of it is so normalized. You're like ripped apart, witch hunted every day in the social media. But even in the physical spaces, there are Hindu fanatics, there are like caste fanatics, there are like ideological fanatics. They come from nowhere and we don't have anything to protect ourselves from the democracy. And it is like fighting in the empty air. We don't know whom you're fighting. So it is so difficult handling this unconstitutional mobocracy, which has become like part and parcel of, especially after Modi in the last 10 years, it is becoming like really huge. I mean, you release a trailer, then somebody tweets in the like saying that this trailer is against Hinduism. Then suddenly, like you have a police coming to your house. I mean, last year my brother's series Godman was shelved. I mean, till now it was never broadcast in Z, and it was commissioned by Z. And somebody, Subramania Swami, or some Hindu fanatics, H. Raja, they just tweeted, and all clauses like whatever they filed against the dissenters, the student protesters, when the JMU thing happened, all clauses my brother was filed. It was like then we had to fight against it and like get him bail out of it. I mean, now these draconian laws, these laws, they're going like footloose about it. They won't. any kind of dissent, anything that is disagreeable. I mean, it is just not journalists. It is film producers, filmmakers, artists, writers. I mean, uh, what is happening? I mean, nobody can have any different opinion here. I mean, these laws can be used on nobody is safe here in this country. I mean, it's just not filmmakers and journalists. Nobody is safe. Like a YouTube channel, the Karupar Kootam, they just like released a song against some. I mean, it was just a tease. It was a song teasing some Lord Murugan, and somebody tweeted, and the entire YouTube channel with 2 million subscribers was deleted, and the anchors and the producers were in jail for 8 months, for 6 months, for a year, and nobody spoke about it. It is just a song teasing some Hindu god, and they were in jail for a year. I met one of the comrades yesterday. So it can happen to anybody. Nobody is safe. So if you are not together, then it will be like today it is me, and tomorrow it can be any one of us. So we have to, hold ourselves together and, say to each other that we are there for you. Otherwise, we are not going to win this fight. We are not going to be safe anytime soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Lena. On that note, that's a wrap from all of us over here for our discussion today. I think the panel was extremely powerful, and I'm really glad that each one of you could join us and share your insights. This will be published as an article as well as a report for IPS News and for IAWRT, which I'll share. And I hope that people will also get a chance to read it and also watch this again, because thank you. All of you all were amazing, and more power to you, and more solidarity and support. And as everybody said, independent media is how we are surviving. So let's support each other and continue these conversations and continue doing the kind of work that all of us are doing. So thank you so much, everyone. It was wonderful to have you on the Sania Farooqui show, an absolute honor, truly. All right. So on that note, we are going to wrap up. Thank you for those who tuned in. I hope that you will subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Spotify. This, as I mentioned, will also be published as a report both for IAWRT and for IPS News. You can follow my work, and I hope to see you all again tomorrow and in the next few days, where we will also be having a lot more conversations. So thank you so much, and stay safe, and I'll see you again tomorrow.